I didn't know anything about Brexit until the night of the Brexit referendum. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Leila, the Lenormand reader, and if you're new here, welcome. I'd love for you to subscribe because we do some amazing readings with the amazing Lenormand deck. Now in this video, I wanted to tell you about something different. It's a little bit of a different video than the usual draws that I do with the cards. And I wanted to share with you the cards that I had drawn when I predicted the Brexit vote or the outcome of the Brexit vote. Now, a little bit of background about this. I want to immediately confess that I didn't know anything about Brexit until the night of the Brexit referendum. Sorry. Where I'm from, we have a host of other sociopolitical issues and economic issues that we deal with. And when the Brexit vote was taking place, or I should say the Brexit referendum, when it was taking place, I had been in North America for a short time, and I wasn't really aware of all of these things that were happening across the Western world. So I discovered the Brexit referendum was taking place the very night it was taking place. And when I came across this situation, I simply could not believe it. I was glued in on this whole referendum issue, and I was watching the ticker all throughout the night. I stayed up the whole night just catching up on this entire situation. And really that experience and that Brexit referendum, it completely changed my outlook on politics, on my understanding of world politics and what's going on in the Western world. And so from there on, I become really, really glued into everything political. I am very aware of many things around the world at this stage, and I really understand politics in a way that I never had before. And it's interesting because I had never thought that I would be so engrossed in politics. And now, a few years later, I am reading politics and watching politics very often. And it can be toxic, but, because of my perspective or my background, I have a little of a different perspective on what goes on in the Western world in general. So I don't think it affects me in the way that it affects, people who are directly implicated by things like the Brexit vote and so on. So that's for my background. Now, I was watching the ticker all night long, and at some point I was so anxious about this whole situation. It was so new to me, and I was so surprised by everything that was going on with it that I decided to draw some cards. And I decided to draw it casually. I'm not really invested in Brexit and the UK. I don't live there. I don't have anyone there. And so I decided to just draw 3 cards to see what will be the outcome of this vote. I've been wanting to share these cards with you for the longest time. For years, I've been wanting to share this with you. But because the topic was so contentious, I decided to just postpone it, and I was also waiting for it to happen. And once that was over, I decided I was going to then share it, but it kept dragging and it kept dragging. And here we are. 4 years later, it's 4 years now, 4 years later, finally the decision has been made. And after all of the issues they've had in Parliament and, socially and with people and with the European Union, they've made the decision and they're leaving. So I feel that now the whole situation is behind us. It's much less contentious, or I hope it will be less contentious moving forward. So I feel more comfortable sharing with you what happened, what I drew as in terms of cards for this at the time. And also at the time when I drew the cards, I wasn't fully on YouTube yet. I was still prepping my channel. It was just much earlier on for me. And so it's a photograph that I shared on my Facebook, but of course no one really cared because no one in my closer circle really cares about, the fact that I do cards or, what Lenormand is, like many of you out there. It's something we do a lot on our own. So I decided to draw a few cards to see what was going to be the outcome of this referendum. And lo and behold, I get these 3 cards. This is typical Lenormand. In your face, loud and clear, and there's no 2 ways of interpreting the cards. And I decided to draw just 3 cards because the more cards you have, the more of a story you get. And so it becomes more prone to a lot of different things happening. But what I wanted was a sharp, focused answer to this question of what was going to be the outcome of the referendum. And I get the house, the scythe, and the ring. Obviously, the scythe and the ring is the combination of divorce. There's really no two ways to interpret the cards. It doesn't matter in what order they are, whether it's the scythe before the ring or the ring before the scythe. It just doesn't matter in this case. It's really very clear that this has to do with divorce. So clearly, the outcome of the Brexit vote was going to be to separate, to leave the European Union. And what's also really interesting in these cards is that you've got the house at the outset. Now, the house in this context has to do with the European Union. It represents, the house that is Europe. And when we see the scythe and the ring taking place after the house, we can see that the UK is separating itself from the house. Now, in this case, the order of the cards can make a difference. If, for example, you would have had the house after the ring and the scythe before the ring, suppose you had them in that order, then it's more likely that UK was not going to leave the European Union. It was going to stick with it because we've got the ring and the house together, so that can mean sticking with the Union. But the order that my cards came out in is the house, scythe, and ring. So I wanted to share this card reading with you because it's a really good example of how Lenormand's cards can be interpreted to make sense of any situation, and also how loud and clear they speak. It's just, there's no two ways about it. I was dumbfounded when I saw these cards and I couldn't believe it. And then I was still watching the ticker. I think it was a couple of hours later or well into the morning at that point. And the outcome was this, very close. Was it 52 and 48%? I think that was it. And, I couldn't believe it that was what they voted for. It was such a shock to me because I was just learning about the whole thing anyway. And on top of that, the Brexit vote came out positive to exit from the European Union. And on top of that, my cards were right on the ball. So it was such an experience for me. And so I really wanted to share that with you. Now that all of this has been happening, and I've been following it really, really closely, I have to say that I'm really suspicious about how well Boris Johnson is going to deliver on the Brexit, because at the outset, after this whole thing with Theresa May was over, and then Boris Johnson came in as Prime Minister, and he started reworking the deal, Nigel Farage often said that this was not a good deal, that it was just a recycled deal. It was just a recycling, or what was it, a reheating of the Theresa May deal.
I mean, this is a guy that just flips and flops, says what he thinks the audience wants to hear. When it comes to Brexit, I heard him yesterday talking in Belfast, saying that the Irish backstop was unacceptable, and yet he voted for it at the third time of asking. So it's very difficult to know just how sincere Boris is when he says he'll take us out on the 31st of October.
The real sellout would be to sign us up to a dreadful deal that would leave us trapped for year upon year.
What Boris has now done is to amend it, get some changes, to put lipstick on the pig. There are some things that are better about it, some things that are worse about it.
He has hived off a part of the United Kingdom, despite his own promises that he would never do any such thing. But the problem is, it doesn't get Brexit done.
So I was really suspicious about what was going on, and I still am, and I don't really think that this has been thoroughly looked at, or the folks, who support Brexit and want to exit the European Union, they're all excited because something is happening, but I have to really wonder, well, what exactly is happening? And so I want to just draw some more cards to see what will be the outcome now of the actual Brexit deal. What will now be the outcome of the actual exit from the European Union. So let's head over to my table and let's do a shorter reading. I'm not going to get into too much detail. Let's see what I decide to pull out. Join me at the table. So let's set the intention here to get an understanding if this is going to be a real Brexit, if this is going to be a real exit of the UK from the European Union, or if there's going to be a lot of stuff dragging on and they're going to be tied into the union for longer than they're hoping for. And that's the tricky part of the question, right? The question is the timeline of how long is this going to take before it's a clean break. And if it is going to actually be a clean break, or if there's going to be these European Union remnant implications for the UK. So Let's draw a 9-card portrait. I suggest a 9-card portrait. Keep it simple and clean with a central card. And let's see what we get. And maybe the cards themselves will guide us into maybe a better understanding of the question. So my deck is shuffled. I'm just shuffling a little bit. I'm gonna fan the deck for even more shuffling. And I'm gonna draw these 9 cards. Ooh. All right, now this is a powerful set of cards. We've got the whip right in the center of the 9-card portrait, and to be honest with you, this is really what I anticipated because, you know, Nigel Farage had been saying that this is not a good deal. And even though the Brexit happened, and I think the stork is very clear about, you know, the movement, the change, and so I think this represents the Brexit referendum very, very well. We've got the stork here, and it's all about change and reshufflings and things like that. But look what we have in the first diagonal. And to me, as far as I'm concerned, the first diagonal of the 9-card portrait is the most important one because it covers both the first and the central card of the portrait. And these are the most important positions in my system. We've got the whip and the clouds. So honestly, I saw this coming. I was really suspicious about this being a good deal for the Brexiteers and the people who want to leave the European Union, but we've got the whip and the clouds. We also have the bird. What is really good is that we see the sun and the star, so these are very positive for wish fulfillment, you know, for what the Brexiteers want. But I'm not seeing that this is going to be an easy path, especially from this first diagonal. And what's interesting is that we also have the woman in the cards. Now, I suspect that the woman is the United Kingdom in this case, and that's because of Britannia and that sense of, you know, the connection with Britain as that land, you know, in the older sense of Europe, the UK. And so I do feel that the woman here can represent Britain herself. And with the bear, you know, that sense of strength, that sense of wanting to be independent, these are coming through here. So let's read the lines of this portrait and put the story together with more detail. So we start with the first diagonal. We've got the stork, whip, and clouds. So obviously this has to do with the separation, with wanting to leave. And we can see that there's a lot of contention here. There's a lot of problems, and without question, we're all aware that there's a lot of tension between the folks who want to leave and the folks who want to remain. And so this is what could be at play here. But remember that our focus was to see if this was going to be a clean break or if it was going to drag on. So I took the position of siding more with the Brexiteer, so if the deal is going to work in the question, and so if it answers it positively, then it would be a clean break for the Brexiteers, and if it's negative, then it could be a challenge for the Brexiteers. And this is how I have phrased the question. So with the whip and clouds, clearly this is going to be a challenge for the Brexiteers. I did suspect that. I mean, if you had been following the politics, if you'd been, you know, watching what Nigel Farage has been saying, you know, that this is going to be a challenging situation for them to exit. I also suspect there's going to be a big cost, and I think this is going to come through the bear, a cost to leave the European Union. Now, what's nice is we've got the woman, whip, and sun, and what's really interesting here is that, you know, we're taking the woman to represent Britannia, as in the UK, and the whip and sun is clearly a challenge, but because the sun is on the other side of the whip, it's possible, or it's very likely, that they're going to overcome this challenging bottleneck and come out on top and achieve the goal that is to leave the European Union. However, I do think that when we look at this line here, there's going to be some more challenges coming through the bird and clouds, and that is the column that is on the right, so it tends to represent the future. So let's look at these columns. We've got the one here is the stork, bear, and woman. So this line often represents the past or the earlier phases of a situation, and I do think it's representing more of the past because I think it represents the referendum itself. The stork is all about change and wanting to shuffle things up, and then the bear and woman here can represent the sense of independence. You know, the bear is about strength, standing on your 2 feet, you know, being tough. And this is really what the Brexiteers had been wanting. They'd been wanting to be independent and separate from the European Union. So I do think that this can represent the Brexit referendum and wanting to leave. In the present, we've got the cross, whip, and star. So this is clearly a challenging combination because of the cross next to the whip. Clearly, this has been a very, very difficult decision for everyone inside Parliament, outside Parliament, all around the world, in Europe. You know, the cross is all about the big decisions, and the whip is obviously all around challenges. What's nice is that the star is in this line, and so it represents the idea that, you know, they've never given up hope on wanting to see the result of the referendum being implemented. They haven't given up hope on this. And I say this because this column here, T crosses the bottom line. We've got the woman, star, and clouds. And the star and clouds has to do with hope and faith and wishing despite the complications. And as I suggested, the woman represents the UK in this case. So this is where we are at. We're at the very big challenges now, at the crossroads, needing to, you know, sort this thing out and now get out of the European Union. It can also represent the idea of implementing the decision to leave, okay, because of the star, the idea of wish fulfillment here. And then in the right side of the portrait, we've got the sun, the bird, and the clouds. Now, the sun is a beautiful all-around success card. The bird and clouds, I think, in this context is going to come down to the negotiations that the United Kingdom has to now undertake with the rest of the world, with Europe especially. And what's so nice is that the sun is pretty powerful here. So it's an all-around success card. So I do think that we can look forward to some positive negotiations coming through for the UK post-Brexit. And I'm not saying this is going to be easy, because the bird and the clouds is a challenging combination. So if I didn't have the sun in this line, the bird and clouds can be serious in terms of, you know, hurtful things being said, some real arguments, you know, a lot of challenges in a conversation or a debate. But because the sun is in this line, it's going to help overturn these challenges, and I do think there's going to be some wins, at least for the UK. It's also possible that there's going to be some compromises, because there's also the clouds in the line, and remember that the whip is in the center of this portrait. So far, it's looking like there's going to be some positive achievements for the Brexiteers, for the UK as it exits the European Union, but it's not going to come easily. It's going to come with a lot of challenge, and I do think that there's a phase of challenge. So it's a bottleneck before they're on the other side of all this. I think it's going to be a while too. So let's read the rows and then wrap up the portrait. We've got the stork, cross, and sun at the top. Again, I think this has to do with the commitment to Brexit, the commitment of wanting to leave. The cross can be about that sense of faith and really not letting go of the outcome of the referendum, which was to leave. And the sun here is a very positive card. It's all around wish fulfillment card, like we said. So I do think that this top row is representing the part that Boris Johnson delivered on, which is getting the UK out of the European Union. So I think his deal was accepted, and they didn't go back on the decision of the referendum. So this was a major win for the Brexiteers, and I think we see it here. And remember that I interpret the stork as representing the Brexit referendum in this context, because it has to do with change. And then with the sun on the other side of this big decision represented by the cross, I think it's a good interpretation of the line in this context. Now, a challenging line here, the bear, whip, and bird. Again, we interpreted this column and we see that it T crosses this row. In common, we have the bird, which is all about negotiations and all of the many debates and conversations that are going to now take place now that the UK is out of the Union. And we've got the bear, whip, and bird. Now, that's interesting, because the bear here can represent anyone in authority. So it could be Britain herself, it could be the European Union, it could even be Boris Johnson or other folks in a leadership position and that are going to be part of these conversations. Now, the whip and the bird, this is not going to be easy. These are going to be some really tough negotiations. I really suspect too that the bear can actually represent Donald Trump, because he's like, you know, this big bullish kind of character, and so the bear would represent him really well. And last I checked, there were some issues between Boris Johnson and Donald Trump with regards to some trade agreements and the 5G, Huawei's 5G in the UK. So these are possible. I'm not saying that the bear represents only Donald Trump, but clearly there's going to be some challenges with leaders around the world as the UK exits the European Union and reestablishes a different path now moving forward. The whip and bird by themselves, outside of this context, standalone, have to do with challenging conversations. They can have to do with gossip, nasty things being said and things like that. A little bit like the bird and clouds, really. It's a pretty similar structure between these two. But in this context, we're seeing that the leadership is going to have to step up to some very serious conversations here. And there's going to be quite a few challenges to work through. And I think we all expect that. So I think the cards are pretty aligned. And we did look at the bottom line. We saw the woman, star, and clouds. And I do think this is, the spirit of Britannia, the British people, the UK, having faith in wanting to do this, really not letting go of the outcome of the referendum and seeing themselves through the confusion. So I would also say that the woman can represent the people of the UK as opposed to the bear, which can represent the leadership in the UK. I think that's also a really good way of interpreting the cards in this context. And the people are all for this. They really want to, really stick with the outcome of the vote and see themselves through this challenge here. And then the leadership is the one that has the burden of figuring out the big negotiations and the big detail. So overall, this is quite a fascinating portrait in light of the Brexit thing going on, wouldn't you say? And clearly the whip being in the center of all this is not going to be easy. It's probably going to take more time than people would like. And though there are many wins, it's really going to come down possibly to the details of the negotiations. And it's also possible that there's going to be more disagreements down the line. And what I'm suspecting here is at the level of the people. So people people on both sides of the debate. There could be a lot more tensions also coming through in this sense because, and I can see why that is. When it comes down to the deals and the new deals that the UK is going to undertake, it's going to have a major impact on how people operate in business, the customs and immigration and all sorts of issues come into play with this. So I think it could come down to the different issues and how the different deals are implemented. So there's going to be probably more disagreement between people on the different issues and on the implications of the different deals that the leadership undertakes for this new chapter in the UK's history. So let's brace ourselves for a bumpy ride now that the UK is officially out of the European Union. I think it now just starts. So the big questions are now going to be asked. Now that this decision has been done with and they've stuck with the decision and they've decided to leave the European Union, that was the big win that we saw at the top. I think now is the big portion that comes in, the tricky stuff that comes in, the new deals as the UK enters a new chapter in its history. So what did you think of this reading? Please make sure you leave me your comments below. I'd love to read them. And what I really wanted to do through this video is to share with you how it's possible to use Lenormand's cards for any context and to make sense of them for any question. I mean, the house, scythe, and ring, that was really on the ball with regards to the outcome of the Brexit referendum. And now these cards with the whip right in the middle and the bird being key and the bear about the leadership, I think there's plenty of cards that really align well with the situation. And you saw how we can make sense of them for this context, how I took the bear to represent leadership, how I took the woman to represent the UK, and then the whip in the middle is very obvious and answers a question really directly. So tell me what you thought about all this. Would you use these cards in these ways? Are there special contexts that you use the cards for? I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. If you're interested in learning how to read Lenormand and to master it so that you can interpret it for any context, then I certainly invite you to check out the links that I have for you in the description box. I teach the Lenormand method thoroughly. I have a full-on master course for this, so do check it out. I also have the master guides and more resources for you to get you started. So I'd love to have you in the loop if you're interested in learning and mastering Lenormand. And before I let you go, I want to say thank you so much again for tuning in, and I am looking forward to our next reading together. So stay tuned for those.